Well, hello there and welcome to the channel, and in this video I'm going to talk to you about caring of your shade loving plants. And we've got a particular shady border, which is this one right behind me, and yes, I can see it does have some sun on it, but that is only because it is late in the evening and finally the sun has come around and shone some light on it. So to begin with, let's not make things too hard for us when it comes to shade loving plants. You want to do a little bit of research and find some plants that not only tolerate growing in low light conditions but actually look good too. You know, it's very easy to pick a load of ferns, a load of green plants that kind of mash into each other in the border, so nothing really stands out. So it's worth just having a pick through, doing your research and trying to find some plants that actually not only do well in the shade but also look good. So before we start, I'm going to show you a couple of plants that we have in our garden that bring a little bit of light and sparkle into your borders, and you know, why make it hard for yourself? So look at this absolutely wonderful thing here. This is fuchsia Japonica Spider Web, and it has this absolutely superb variegation on these leaves. Look at that. You know, how can you get a plant that has this much whiteness in it, still grows and stays in the shade? Because you can see this thing a mile away. So if you're looking for hardy evergreen shrub that doesn't get too big, fuchsia Spider Web, absolutely superb. You know, as far as shade loving plants go, this is absolutely wonderful. And the thing is, when it comes to care of this, you don't really need to do much. All you need to make sure is that if you're planting in the shade and the shade is caused by a tree, that one, then you need to make sure that it gets enough water, because these trees have massive root systems. They'll suck all the moisture out of the soil during periods of hot weather, and these underplanted plants can really struggle trying to get water in. So regarding care with something like this, just make sure if you're planting next to a tree, make sure it does get watered during periods of drought. Now, hostas are an obvious choice when it comes to shade loving plants. In fact, you could say a bit of a boring choice, but look at this thing here. This is a giant leaved hosta. That is bigger than my head. You know, absolutely superb. So quite striking. And really, with plants that need to be in the shade, care that you need to take is to make sure that during the periods of the day when they can get sun, that it's not too strong. So shade all day really for hostas, otherwise you can easily get scorching. And you can see in the evenings where the sun can pop over, we are getting a little bit scorched there. So shade loving plants absolutely fine, but some of them need to be in the shade to prevent scorching. Now this is a particularly lovely plant for the shade because it's mostly silver on this. This is a Brunera Macrocarpa. Macrocarpa just means large leaf, and this particular form with you know, almost, what would you say, 95% silver, that is the cultivar Jack Frost. And you know, regarding care of this fella, you just got to be aware that the slugs and the snails do like to rip these apart, so you've got to put in your slug and snail management. Now, you can't get slug pellets that are particularly effective anymore, so I don't even bother with those in our garden. So what I would do is use the old baited slug pubs. So you buy a little plastic container. I'll show you what that looks like. You part bury that in the ground because animals at night can kind of knock that over, and then you keep your lid on this because also stops animals from drinking out of it. And you put in a beer, and you put in something that smells like a really beery, yeasty beer. So lagers don't do it, ciders certainly won't do it. I put in bitters, and look at that. I mean, that is a great collection. Also stinks, that's disgusting. A great collection dead slugs that are making an absolute mess. You know, that shows that works, but really that is pretty gross. Now look at these two handsome devils either side of that little tree fern there. These are both cultivars of dead nettle, and they are probably the most striking colourful foliage of any of the shade loving plants. And look at the size of those, absolutely beautiful. Anyway, and there's going to be a bit of a recurring theme here. You need to keep them moist, and you need to, once they're moist, you need to keep an eye on the slug and snails damaging. So that's why we put these in pots. We've moved these out into the front, but even so, you look carefully at them, they still get through. but that's a brilliant choice for a shade. I mean, look at the colour combination there of your tree fern, your Brunnera, and your coleus. I mean, that's as good a colour you're going to get in most flower beds. I guess when you're talking about shade loving plants, you can kind of put those into two groups. You're going to have a selection of plants that need to be in shade all day, you know, quite heavy shade, and then you're going to have quite a large selection of plants that will tolerate shade, so dappled shade, you know, some sun in the mornings and some in the afternoon, but unable to tolerate full sun in the heat of the day. So when it comes to those two, you do need to care for them slightly differently. And you know, plants like your coleus, plants like most of your hostas, some of the fuchsias, you can't put those in the full sun again, because they'll just scorch. And talking about fuchsias, I've got an absolute beauty that needs to be kept in the shade. I'll just show you where that is now. Now take a little look at this beauty, and because we're right at the end of the day, we've got the sun backlighting these massive leaves. Look at the size of these, really big, but it's a beauty. This is the Bolivian fuchsia boliviensis, and look at this strikingly red grouping of flowers there. And these in its native habitat of Bolivia, these would be pollinated by hummingbirds. Absolutely wonderful. And again, you can't keep this in full sun, it has to be in the shade. And again, we've got this in the shade of this old apple tree, and it's doing really well. So you know, put this on your list for plants for the shade that are really quite striking. So as a kind of a general rule, it's always down to researching your plants, researching where they've came from, and checking out from like the RHS websites what they prefer. So anything that needs to be in deep shade all day, make sure that they get that, otherwise you will get scorching problems, as we're seeing a wee bit on this hosta here. Anything else is absolutely fine, so you can put that on your north facing beds or your northeast facing beds, at least in the UK. Obviously for our watchers and viewers in Australia, that's going to be the opposite, so like opposite day. Things like the big tree ferns, you know, these require a lot of water, and they'll tolerate full sun anyway if they're given enough water, but most people plant them in the shade. Make sure they're fed and make sure they're watered quite regularly through the crown. You can certainly water the trunk, water the floor, but you've got to get it in the crown. Things like this alocasia here, again, needs to be in the shade for the best part of the day, but again, heavy waterer, and you tend to find this as a fairly standard. Plants that like the shade also like it damp, and of course if you've got damp and shade, you've got slugs, so you've got to make sure that you've got your slug control in place, like we have down here again. So another slug pub, simply because these coleus, they're always on them, the slugs, always on them. So there you go. When it comes to taking care of your shade loving plants, there are kind of three things you need to look at. Slug care. Make sure they're moist enough throughout the year, especially if they're growing under trees and especially during periods of drought. And the third thing is just to make sure that your fully shade loving plants do get the full shade, and that your dappled shade plants can be put, you know, or just out of the full sun during the heat of the day. Anyway, if I've missed anything that you'd like to add, we'd love to hear from you. Put those in the comments, and thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.